There comes a point in life when the noise around us grows so loud that we begin to forget the sound of our own soul. We spend countless hours trying to explain ourselves, our choices, our wounds, our dreams, to those who may never truly hear us. We try to justify our pain to people who only see our masks, not our battles, and yet real healing does not come when the world finally understands us. It comes when we stop pleading for understanding. When we become still, when we turn inward. Silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of the self, and choosing yourself, especially when no one else does, is the first act of inner freedom. Let us walk through 5 truths that unfold when you stop explaining yourself and begin to choose yourself. There is a strange paradox in the human soul. The more fiercely we try to make our pain understood by others, the further we drift from truly understanding it ourselves. In our desperation to be seen, we often drown out the quiet voice within that is trying to tell us what we actually feel. Silence, though feared, is not emptiness. It is not surrender. It is the sacred space in which the psyche begins to gather the fragments of itself that were scattered by suffering. It is in this stillness that the unconscious, long suppressed by the noise of explanation and justification, begins to rise like a forgotten river breaking through dry earth. To be silent after pain is not to be passive. It is to step aside and allow the deeper self to speak. Consider the soul after heartbreak. In the first rush of loss, the mind races to craft stories. Why it ended, how it might have been prevented, who is to blame, and what could have been done differently. This constant rehearsing becomes a shield, as if by explaining the wound to others we could somehow erase its sting. We tell our friends the same narrative again and again, polishing the details as though we could make chaos logical. But there is a moment, often unexpected, when the stories collapse under their own weight. The explanations grow thin, and there is nothing left to say. The world becomes quiet, and in that quiet, the pain, raw and undiluted, finally emerges. This is the beginning of true healing, not when we convince others that our wound is real, but when we stop convincing anyone at all and simply let ourselves feel it. Silence creates a holding space for the psyche, much like a dark womb cradles new life. The nervous system, exhausted from defending and performing, slowly unclenches. Breath becomes deeper. Thoughts lose their frantic edge. Studies of trauma recovery have shown that healing accelerates when individuals are given safe, silent environments to process their emotions rather than being urged to explain or analyze them prematurely. The psyche has its own rhythm, and it speaks in images, sensations, and symbols before it speaks in words. Silence allows this inner language to surface. When we talk too soon, we translate our pain into rational terms before it has revealed its meaning. We become interpreters of something we have not yet truly heard. There is an unseen cost to constant explanation. Each attempt to justify our pain to others is a small act of self-abandonment, a turning away from our own inner knowing to seek approval outside. It is as though we are saying, "I will believe my pain is real only if you believe it with me." But the soul does not need witnesses. It needs presence. It needs us to sit beside our suffering without commentary, without rushing to assign it purpose or shape. Imagine sitting by the bedside of a grieving friend. You would not demand that they explain the logic of their grief. You would simply be there. This is how we must learn to be with ourselves. Silence is the deepest form of companionship we can offer our wounded parts. It says, "I will not run from you. I will not speak over you. I will simply remain." At first, this silence may feel unbearable. The mind will resist it, reaching for distractions, trying to resurrect old stories as a way of escaping the rawness. But if we endure this discomfort, something miraculous happens. Beneath the noise of explanation, there is another voice, softer and older, like the echo of a forgotten song. It belongs to the deeper self, the one who has watched every joy and sorrow from the shadows. This self does not speak in arguments or defenses. It speaks in feelings, in images, in sudden flashes of understanding that arrive like lightning. It tells us not what others should know about our pain, but what the pain has been trying to tell us all along. And when this voice is finally heard, something shifts inside. The wound is no longer an intruder, it becomes a messenger. I once knew a man who lost everything he thought defined him, his career, his marriage, his sense of direction. For months he spoke to anyone who would listen, explaining his downfall as if rehearsing it could redeem it. He wore his pain like a case he was trying to win in the court of public opinion, and yet he grew only more hollow. One day he retreated to the mountains alone, leaving behind his phone and his words. He spent weeks in silence. When he returned, he said something I have never forgotten. The silence didn't fix me. It showed me that I was never broken, only lost from myself. It was only when he stopped explaining his pain that he could hear what it was pointing to, not failure, but transformation. Silence is not an absence of expression, it is the presence of essence. In silence, we are not performing our pain, we are communing with it. We are not demanding that others see our wounds. We are letting our wounds reveal what they have carried. This is why true healing often begins not in the therapist's office, nor in conversations with friends, but in the quiet hours when we are alone with our truth, stripped of performance. It is a sacred paradox. When we stop trying to be understood, we begin to understand ourselves. The world teaches us to be loud about our suffering so that others will validate it, but the soul asks us to be still so that it may transform it. Silence is where pain ceases to be an enemy and becomes a guide. It is where the fractured parts of us return one by one, because they know they will be heard at last. And though the world may continue to misunderstand us, it no longer matters, for we no longer misunderstand ourselves. So when pain arrives, resist the instinct to explain it away. Do not rush to make sense of it for others. Let it be senseless for a while, let it be wordless. Sit with it as you would sit with a child who is crying, not asking it to speak, not trying to make it stop, but simply holding it until it grows quiet in your arms. This is how wounds begin to close, not through explanation, but through presence. Not through noise, but through silence, for it is in the hush of our own acceptance that the voice of the soul, long silenced, begins at last to sing. There is a quiet tragedy that unfolds each time we reach outside ourselves to justify who we are. The moment we begin bending our truths into words designed to soothe someone else's uncertainty, something essential inside us slips away. It is so subtle that we rarely notice it happening, a slight tension in the voice as we try to sound more agreeable, a soft erasure of the parts that might make others uncomfortable, a quick rephrasing of what we truly feel so it will land gently on their ears. And yet, over time, these small concessions gather like layers of dust upon the soul, dulling its radiance. What begins as a single compromise soon becomes a way of living. We stop inhabiting ourselves and begin performing ourselves, offering curated fragments while the rest of us hides in the shadows, unheard and unseen. To explain yourself repeatedly is to give away the sacred ground of your own being, piece by piece, until you are left standing nowhere. The psyche is not built to live as an echo of other people's expectations. It is meant to grow like a tree rooted in its own soil, reaching toward its own light. But when we seek approval through explanation, we pull up our own roots and try to plant them in the shifting soil of other minds. No tree survives long when it must be replanted daily, and yet this is what so many of us do. We uproot our essence to chase understanding from those who were never meant to hold it. Consider the artist who begins her journey with wild, luminous colors and strange, unsettling shapes. Her work pulses with something alive and uncontainable, but after each exhibition she listens too closely to the murmurs in the gallery. One person finds her colors too harsh, so she softens them. Another says her shapes are confusing, so she straightens them. A third says her art feels too personal, so she begins painting what is fashionable instead of what is true. With each compromise she receives more polite praise, but inside she grows emptier. The fire that once guided her brush fades to embers. One day she stands before her canvas and realizes she no longer remembers why she ever painted at all. This is what happens to the soul when it is fed on explanation instead of authenticity. It forgets its original song. The danger of constant explanation is that it replaces being with performing. When you live for explanation, you are always looking at yourself through someone else's eyes, editing yourself in anticipation of their reaction. Your life becomes a mirror maze, and you lose sight of which reflection is the real one. It is a form of self-abandonment so disguised as connection that it can feel like love. You tell yourself you are building relationships, but what you are really building are cages, delicately crafted prisons made of other people's approval. And while those cages may feel safe, they are too small for the soul to breathe. We are taught from childhood to seek belonging by smoothing away our sharp edges. Make them understand you, they say, as if understanding were the same as acceptance. But understanding is often conditional, while love of the self must be unconditional. When you stand in your truth without explanation, some will misunderstand you, and that is inevitable. But misunderstanding is not rejection. It is simply the natural distance between two distinct souls. Only when you allow that distance to exist without fear can true closeness emerge. If you contort yourself to erase every misunderstanding, you erase yourself along with it. Choosing yourself means standing unmoved in the center of your own being, even while the winds of judgment howl around you. It means allowing others to wrestle with the mystery of you without rushing in to resolve their discomfort. It is to trust that your essence is valid whether or not it is explained, whether or not it is applauded. This is not arrogance, it is integrity. The most powerful souls throughout history were often misunderstood, even ridiculed, because they refused to dilute their essence to fit the collective mold. They understood something most of us forget, that the soul owes no explanation for its shape. It is not here to be understood, it is here to become whole. I once knew a man who lived most of his life as a diplomat of his own identity. Every conversation was a negotiation, every choice accompanied by elaborate justifications. He could sense the slightest flicker of disapproval in a stranger's eyes, and would reshape himself to soothe it. People admired him. He was well liked, agreeable, endlessly accommodating. But late at night he confessed to feeling hollow, like a house beautifully decorated on the outside but echoing inside. When he finally stopped explaining himself, many of his relationships fell away. Yet for the first time he could hear his own voice echoing through the quiet spaces of his life, and it did not sound like an apology, it sounded like freedom. The psyche cannot grow in soil where it must prove its worth to survive. Every time you explain yourself to gain approval, you hand over the keys to your inner world and ask someone else to guard them. but no one can be the keeper of your soul except you, and if you wait to be fully understood before you allow yourself to be fully alive, you will wait forever. Some will never understand you, not because you are flawed, but because they have not yet learned to see through the lens you carry. That is not your burden to fix. Your task is to remain whole, even when others see only fragments. It takes immense courage to stop explaining and simply be. At first, it feels like stepping off a familiar stage into the unknown, stripped of applause, but beyond that fear lies a deeper peace. When you no longer perform to be seen, you begin to see yourself. When you no longer abandon your truth to be accepted, you begin to belong to yourself, and in belonging to yourself, you discover the paradox that all great souls learn, that only those who no longer need approval become truly magnetic. People are drawn not to those who explain themselves perfectly, but to those who carry the quiet radiance of inner certainty. To stand in silence while others question you is to choose your center over their comfort. It is to plant your roots deep and let them grow wild, knowing that some will call them tangled because they do not yet understand their pattern, but the soul was never meant to be symmetrical, it was meant to be alive. And aliveness does not ask for permission, it only asks for presence. When you cease the endless explanations, when you step out of the performance and back into your being, you will feel something stir inside that you may have forgotten. The unmistakable pulse of your own life, beating quietly, steadily, without needing to prove itself to anyone. There is a hidden pattern that quietly governs the lives of so many, an endless cycle of reaching outward for worth, of holding out the fragile pieces of one's soul and asking, almost pleading, "Is this enough? Am I enough?" It begins so early that we hardly notice it happening. As children, we learn that love often comes as a reward for good behavior, for pleasing others, for shaping ourselves into something acceptable. And slowly, without realizing it, we begin to mistake external approval for nourishment. We begin to believe that our value depends on how others respond to us. From that belief grows a restless hunger that no amount of praise can ever satisfy, because it is not rooted in the soil of the self. It becomes an emotional loop seeking validation, fearing rejection, explaining, defending, and then seeking all over again. We call it connection, but it is more like captivity dressed as belonging. This cycle is seductive because it offers brief moments of relief. When someone approves of us, when they nod and say we are right or good or admirable, we feel a fleeting sense of safety. But like any fleeting comfort, it fades quickly, leaving us emptier than before. The psyche becomes like a starving creature that must be fed endlessly, not with real sustenance, but with the sugar of applause. And just as the body cannot thrive on sugar, the soul cannot thrive on approval. What it longs for is wholeness, and wholeness does not depend on how we are seen. It depends on how deeply we are rooted in ourselves. Choosing yourself is the act that ends this loop, because it severs the invisible cords that tie your sense of worth to the shifting moods of others. It is a radical gesture of inner allegiance, a turning away from the mirrors that have distorted your image and toward the quiet ground of your own being. When you choose yourself, you are not declaring superiority. You are declaring sovereignty, the right to be the keeper of your own meaning. I remember a woman who spent years justifying every decision she made to her family. She explained why she left a stable job to pursue her art, why she married the man she loved, though he was from a different culture, why she followed a spiritual path that made no sense to those around her. Every choice was presented like evidence in a trial, as though she stood accused of living wrongly and had to prove her innocence. It drained her. One day, exhausted from defending her life, she simply stopped. She offered no more explanations. She said nothing, not in defiance, but in peace. She just lived. At first her family pushed back. They questioned, criticized, tried to pull her back into the old rhythm where her worth depended on their approval. But something about her stillness unsettled them. She did not argue. She did not fight. She just stood anchored in her own presence, and slowly something remarkable happened. They adapted. They stopped demanding explanations. They began to meet her as she was, not as they wished her to be. What changed was not them, but the energetic pattern she had withdrawn from. The cycle of emotional dependency cannot survive without your participation. It is like a dance. When one partner stops moving, the other cannot continue the steps. When you stop offering your worth for validation, those who once fed on yourself, doubt must either meet you in your wholeness or drift away. And if they drift, you will grieve, but you will also breathe more deeply than you have in years. Because the space left behind by their departure is not emptiness. It is the sacred ground where your real self can finally stand. Silence is what makes this transformation possible. Not the silence of repression, but the silence of rootedness. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop asking others to understand before you allow yourself to be, something within you begins to solidify. Your energy, once scattered in all directions, gathers back to your center. You become like a mountain, still, unmoving, yet quietly powerful, and the world, which once seemed so intent on pushing and pulling you, begins to move differently around you. It is not that people suddenly become kinder or more enlightened. It is that your sense of stability no longer depends on their weather. Freedom, as many imagine it, is the state of being universally accepted, universally praised, universally loved. But that is not freedom. That is slavery to a fantasy. True freedom is not being accepted by everyone. It is no longer needing to be. It is walking into a room without carrying the invisible question, do they approve of me? It is making a choice without rehearsing how to justify it. It is being willing to be misunderstood and still at peace. This is a deeper kind of liberation than any external success can offer, because it is not fragile. It does not waver when opinions shift, because it is not built on opinions at all. It is built on presence. When you choose yourself, you break not only your own cycle of emotional dependency, but often the inherited patterns of generations before you. Many of us carry ancestral imprints of seeking worth through service, through perfection, through obedience. We inherit the belief that love must be earned by erasing ourselves. But when you stand in your own truth without apology, you silently tell every part of your lineage that the pattern ends here. You become the one who plants roots where there was once only reaching. And though this choice may look like solitude from the outside, it is in truth the beginning of real connection, for only when you are no longer performing can others truly see you. It is not an easy path. At first the silence can feel like exile. The voices that once kept you tethered will grow louder in protest. Doubt will rise like a storm, asking, what if they leave? What if no one understands? What if I am alone? But there is a deeper voice, softer yet stronger, that will whisper beneath the noise, you are here, and you are enough. If you stay long enough in your own presence to hear that voice, it will change everything. You will no longer chase after love like a beggar. You will carry it within you like a quiet flame. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world will begin to reflect your wholeness back to you. Not because you demanded it, but because your stillness will draw to you those who are capable of meeting you as you are. The ones who needed you to perform will fall away. The ones who recognize the sacredness of your being will stay. And you will see, perhaps for the first time, that love which requires your self-abandonment is not love at all. and love which honors your essence requires no explanation. To choose yourself is not to reject the world, but to return to it whole. It is to stand at the center of your life like a tree rooted deep in the unseen soil of your own worth, no longer swaying at every gust of disapproval. You may be misunderstood, but you will no longer be misplaced. And in that quiet sovereignty, you will discover the kind of freedom that cannot be given or taken away, because it was yours all along, waiting for you to stop seeking and finally come home to yourself. There is a strange paradox hidden at the heart of human connection. The more desperately we try to make others understand us, the more distance we create, while the more we are willing to stand alone in our truth, the closer others can truly come. So much of what we call connection is often little more than the anxious management of perception. We craft careful explanations not to reveal ourselves, but to control how we are seen, as if our worth could only survive in the fragile approval of another's mind. We do not realize that every explanation we offer in fear becomes a veil that obscures our essence. And as we wrap ourselves in these veils, layer upon layer, the people around us are left holding only the fabric of our performances, never touching the living pulse beneath. Authentic connection requires the courage to risk being unseen and misunderstood. This does not mean withdrawing in coldness or pride, but stepping out of the endless dance of justification and simply allowing ourselves to be. When you are rooted in yourself, you no longer grasp at explanations like shields. You no longer speak from the trembling place that fears rejection. You speak from the quiet center of being, and from that stillness your words, few as they may be, carry more truth than all the elaborate stories you once told to earn love. It is a peculiar thing. When you stop trying to prove your worth, people can finally feel it. Think of a friendship where one person constantly explains their every move, fearing that a single unexplained silence might be mistaken for neglect. They apologize for being busy, for needing space, for having their own tides and rhythms. What begins as care becomes tension. The friendship fills with anxiety because every interaction is filtered through the question, will they still accept me if they do not understand? But when you stand firmly in your truth, you can simply say, I needed time, and let that be enough. That simple sentence, rooted, unembellished, becomes a bridge far stronger than all the frantic justifications could build. We imagine that explanations create closeness, but they often create walls. They invite the other to meet not our being, but our reasoning. They give the mind something to grasp while starving the heart of something to feel. Intimacy cannot grow in the soil of performance. It grows only where there is space for mystery, for the unexplainable parts of us to breathe. Those who love you deeply will not demand that you make sense. They will not ask you to translate your inner world into tidy sentences before they decide if it is worthy. They will meet you in the silence between words, in the sacred territory where the soul lives. This is why separation is essential to true connection, not the bitter separation of rejection, but the sacred separation of individuality, the willingness to stand apart so you can be met as you are. When you blur your edges to stay close, you do not create unity, you create enmeshment, a tangled knot where no one can breathe. But when you dare to stand in your own form, whole and unmasked, you offer others something real to hold. Paradoxically, the more fully you belong to yourself, the more possible it becomes for someone else to belong with you. It takes immense courage to allow this space. We are conditioned to believe that love means constant proximity, constant explanation, constant reassurance. But love that demands your continual performance is not love. It is control disguised as care. Real love has room for distance. It has room for silence. It has room for two complete selves to face each other without merging, without swallowing, without fear. This is the sacred tension of intimacy, the meeting of two sovereign beings who choose closeness not out of need, but out of recognition. Imagine a mountain and the valley below it. They are profoundly connected. The valley cradles the mountain's shadow, the mountain shapes the valley's horizon, but they are not fused. The valley does not beg the mountain to shrink so it can feel tall, and the mountain does not lower itself to be less imposing. They honor the space between them, and because of that space, their relationship endures. Human connection is meant to be like this, but we have been taught to collapse ourselves to make others comfortable, to flatten our peaks so that no one feels dwarfed beside us. In doing so, we do not create safety. We create distance because others cannot love what they cannot see, and they cannot see what we have hidden to be accepted. Authentic separation means being willing to walk alone for a while. It means letting some relationships wither if they depend on your self-abandonment to survive. There will be seasons when this feels like loneliness, and your old fears will whisper that you are becoming unlovable. But if you can stay rooted in your own soil through that season, something extraordinary happens. The connections that remain and the new ones that appear will recognize you, not the version of you that performs, but the one who simply is. These are the relationships that will not demand explanations, because they are not with you to manage an image. They are with you to meet a soul. And when this kind of connection finally arrives, it feels different. There is no tension, no fragile balancing act, no hunger to be constantly seen. There is simply a quiet knowing. You can sit together in silence and feel closer than all the words could make you. You can disagree without fear, drift apart and return without guilt. This is not because the bond is weak, but because it is real. It is rooted not in the constant effort to stay connected, but in the mutual reverence of two beings who have chosen to remain whole. In this way, separation becomes the soil from which real closeness grows. It is the paradox of all living things. A forest is not created by trees clinging to each other, but by trees standing in their own space, their roots deep, their branches touching lightly in the wind. So it is with human souls. Only when you no longer collapse yourself to keep others near can they truly approach you. Only when you no longer fear being alone can you be fully together. And only when you stop explaining who you are will those who are meant to know you finally recognize you, not as an image, not as a performance, but as the living, breathing mystery you have always been. There is a certain power that can only be discovered in silence, a power that does not announce itself with noise or spectacle, but rises from the depths like a hidden sun. In the quiet, the endless chorus of opinions fades, the expectations of the world fall away, and you meet the part of yourself that has always been there, waiting. It is the axis of your being, the place within you that does not flinch before rejection, does not bend beneath praise, and does not wither in loneliness. This inner axis is not built from what others see in you. It is built from what remains when everything external has been stripped away. And to reach it, you must dare to enter the silence. We fear silence because it reveals us. It strips away the masks we have spent years perfecting and places us face to face with our own unadorned soul. It is far easier to keep speaking, to keep explaining ourselves into existence, than to sit in the stillness and discover whether we exist at all without the approval of others. But silence is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is the sacred space where the false falls away and the true begins to breathe. When you step into this space, you will notice how much of your energy has been spent trying to be understood, trying to be accepted, trying to control the shifting currents of how others perceive you. You will see how often you have mistaken noise for presence, performance for identity. Many of history's most powerful figures knew this secret. They endured long seasons of isolation, not because they were antisocial, but because they understood that solitude sharpens vision. They withdrew not to escape life, but to return to it whole. Consider the prophets who retreated to deserts, the poets who vanished into forests, the leaders who walked away from crowds to stand alone on mountaintops. They stopped explaining themselves, and in that silence they grew formidable. They learned to hear the voice that does not come from outside, the voice that rises from the depths of being like a spring. This voice does not flatter, does not argue, does not justify. It simply speaks the truth of who you are. When you stop explaining yourself, something extraordinary happens. The noise of the world loses its power over you. Opinions cease to shake you because they no longer define you. Rejection ceases to wound you because it no longer determines your worth. Loneliness ceases to frighten you because you are no longer a stranger to yourself. In silence, you become anchored, and from that anchoring comes a strength unlike any other, not the brittle strength of defiance, but the quiet strength of rootedness, like a tree that does not resist the storm, yet does not fall to it either. Choosing yourself in this way is not selfish, it is sacred. It is an act of reverence for the life that moves through you. The world will tell you to be endlessly available, endlessly explainable, endlessly pleasing. But when you reclaim your energy from explanation, you reclaim it for creation. Instead of scattering your essence to manage how others see you, you gather it back into yourself, and from that fullness something new can be born. The greatest contributions are never made by those who are desperately trying to be understood. They are made by those who have become whole enough to stand misunderstood, if necessary, while bringing their inner vision into form. Silence reveals that you do not need to be seen to exist. You do not need to be agreed with to be real. You do not need constant affirmation to be whole. These realizations are not cold or isolating. They are liberating. They free you from the frantic need to chase validation and allow you to give from abundance rather than from lack. Only when you are rooted in yourself can your gifts flow without distortion, without hidden motives, without the invisible strings of needing something back. Silence severs those strings. It teaches you to give because your cup is full, not because you are trying to fill it through the approval of others. In that way, silence becomes the womb of creation. It is the place where the fragmented self gathers its scattered pieces and becomes one. It is the place where clarity replaces confusion, where the inner flame is rekindled, where the soul ceases to beg for permission to exist and simply begins to shine. And from this wholeness, you can finally offer the world something real, not fragments of yourself begging to be pieced together, but a complete soul that stands on its own. This is how true power is born, not in the noise of striving, but in the stillness of being. To embrace silence is to remember that you are not here to perform. You are here to become, and becoming requires space. It requires the courage to step back from the endless chorus of demands and opinions, to walk alone for a time, to sit with the sacred terror of your own depths. It requires trusting that the self you will meet in that quiet is enough, more than enough. It is the self the world truly needs, the self that no longer fears misunderstanding, that no longer dilutes its light to fit in the fragile containers of other people's expectations. There will be moments when this journey feels like disappearance. Those who have only known your performance may accuse you of withdrawing, of changing, of becoming distant, and in a way they will be right. You are disappearing from their projections, from their demands, from the cage of their understanding, But you are not vanishing, you are arriving. You are stepping into the life that was waiting for you beneath the noise. The silence you once feared will become the soil of your rebirth. And when you return from that silence, you will not need to announce yourself. Your presence will speak without words. Your energy will no longer scatter in explanation. It will radiate in creation. You will not need to chase understanding, because you will embody something deeper than understanding. You will embody truth. And those who are meant to see you will see you, not because you have convinced them, but because they recognize in you the same power they have always longed to find in themselves, the power that is born only in silence, the power of a soul that stands complete. So, if you are tired of defending your existence, let today be the day you fall silent, not in defeat, but in sovereignty. Let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. While they speak, you will heal. While they speculate, you will grow. While they wonder who you are, you will become it. Stop explaining yourself. Choose yourself, because the world does not need your justifications. It needs your wholeness.